Hello, my name is Aleksandr Tavgen, and I just came here to Riga, so it was quite a good walk, quite a long journey, and some things became to be wrong, so I wanted to start a live test just to show, but as you can see there was some problems with loading the assets, but nevertheless I want to introduce quite interesting project, which is a good example of cooperation between technology, between theater, between music. And my name is Aleksandr Tavgen. I'm working right now as software architect in Playtech, and also I'm leading open source project, which is oriented on creating engine for time series. And I have more than 19 years of industry experience, starting working as a software engineer up to robotics and some high-level functional programming. And I wanted to show just a small intro about the project, how it was built, and I will present so here is our theater in Estonia, Russian theater, main area, and here is some short teaser of how the performance was created, prepared, and this was quite unique performance production, which, as I know, nobody made in the world of theater, and I will show why. So let's start with the main conception. And last year we had Estonia celebration 100th anniversary, and I guess Latvia is also had. And there were a set of series from different organizations, from different groups for this anniversary year. And 22 Estonian theaters get a task to implement, to create own interpretation of Estonian history. And everything was played by chance, so everybody take some time range, like 20s, from 20s to 30s, from 30s to 40s, etc., etc. And Russian Center was assigned the topic of the future of Estonia, which was quite unusual. And the main thing about the future is that it's not defined, so it depends on our choices and who should decide about our future. It's not like us, because we are already old guys, and so it will be our children. And we made countrywide survey. We asked from different schools, different kindergarten, to describe the region of Estonia, of Estonia future. And we had a lot of pictures. You can see this is some of the pictures which our children wrote, and like this, and this one. So after an analyzing of so-called scenarios or vision which were proposed by the children, we found that they compose some sort of common scenarios. For example, infotechnology one, or ecological one, multicultural, cosmical one. So almost every response could be put in one of those tendencies. And again, as I said, future is not predefined. It depends on choices we make. And the main idea came here that this production should not have predefined plot. So it means that depending on choices made by the audience, the plot, the final play will be different. So we had a non-linear plot, potential future scenarios, for example, like if technological one or ecological one were like set as a different novellas, and everything was united by the story of main family, main chapters, and one of the oldest guy was the same children who gave answer 100 years before. So events take place in the year 21 and 18, and characters falls in different versions of Estonia, of the future of Estonia. And you know, when we build software, when we want to implement our system, we usually use some mocks. We set up some prototypes. So the same is applied for a theater. So here is a mock-up for the main stage, and the idea for the stage set is like construction toy, which can take any shape in the hands of the children, and it also shaped like a graph. And if we talk about the different storylines combined together, then we can talk about the graph representing the scenarios possible. And yes, it was required to map all possible scenarios, all possible novellas, depending on different choices, as a non-linear set. And if we talk about the future options, then if you talk even, for example, about the technological one, there was like two versions. Utopia one, when everything is fine, a lot of unicorns, everybody's happy, but often is utopia leads to dystopia, and it was like connected with each other. And we have a lot of storylines. The most important thing when you create such kind of system that the places, the scenes should not be repeated if they were played or if they were chosen. You can see this is like how it looks like. Sorry, it's like a normal presentation right now. We created it with a higher resolution, but it was intentional decision because we didn't want to show like all possible ways to go to the finish. And for example, here's about 49 different finals, and if you are starting here, this is like a point of making a choice. Point of, for example, do we see that this kind of future will be in Estonia in 100 years? And actually this was quite a Buddhistic play. Why? Because amount of rehearsal for every novellas was huge, but the final play can be from 1.5 hours up to 4 hours. So it was like Buddhistic play, which differences between different performances was defined with the amount of non-played scenes. There were actually a lot of challenges here. The stage lighting, and I will show, you can see that all this like graph or construction toy had a huge amount of LEDs, controllers, etc. It was necessary to create costumes for every version, for every possible scenario of the future. So it means that if we have let's say 12 of them, 20 of them, then we need to create 20 versions of costumes for every character. And another challenge was to create a voting system driving the storyline built upon a graph model. So I just want to show a bit of performance. So here is like after making some choices, the plot will start from the multicultural version of the future, where all languages and genders mixed, everything is accepted, and every novella started with the news blog. From one side, it gave time for an actor to change their clothes because nobody knows what will go next until voting is finished. And from another point, it gives like the context of the future where the novellas is started. And I can show you some piece of such a news blog. For 5 languages to mix it.
General Isabel Pagenis oli dedicated to 10 vuotesta momentum quando intersexuaalse conoscere Grand Rise comunità. Феста commences Musubergil a Добродолже Ледеси Амор Плацле. Se on очень importante vida de menes et päeva mil intersexual.
One of the the irony was that here was Elena Salomina, the real host in our national television, so everybody knows her. And after a news blog, for example, novellas is started. So it's like a multicultural future, everything is fine. The Simeonovs, like main characters, have a family night. Daughter brings some boyfriend, and they went to a party. You can see it was quite a lot of changes from the technical part, how to implement everything that should perform, for example, up to 4 hours. And afterwards, everybody go to a party, and at the end of the scene, audience voting is opened. Will the future of Estonia be like this? And if the audience said, yeah, okay, it's like fun, everything is quite cool, then the next part of the play was the multicultural dystopia, because all the freedoms were limited, new restrictions introduced, and special forces like close the party, sort people, part of the people were welcomed, and the part quite technically closed down, and the destiny was decided by some execution machine for the future. So all this plot was combined from different set of novellas, depending on the choices we made. But one of the interesting things, the technical solution for the voting system, because system should collect votes, like show and voting results, make decisions based on on the final voting amounts, and the system should select the next storyline depending on results. And one main idea was also that the system should communicate with the audience using a natural language. So it was like a new actor, we could say, which communicates and announces or opens the vote using the natural language. And again, there is some parts which is behind the scenes. For example, the this option for make administration of system showing this full statistics, and we call it TEMA. It's mother in Estonia, and yeah, essentially it is another actor, so-called artificial intelligence in our future. So about the mobile client, we actually have about 400, 600 people sitting in a large room who should be able to give the vote within 1 minute. And people should be able to vote using their phones. And as I know, nobody wants to download some app. Nobody downloads some apps if you are not like Facebook or Twitter. So it should be a web application created in 2 languages. The main problem here was that in a case of mobile devices, you have numerous operation systems with the different versions. You have numerous models. You have a numerous amount of browser versions. And in the beginning, I was created using Vue, but there was a main problem when we tested everything in our company. Everything worked because everybody has some latest modern telephones, but in a real production test, we had a problem that some older phones have a problem with the votes given. So everything was rewritten in vanilla JavaScript within 3 hours. We had a minute application which shows, for example, how many people gave their vote, how it's like against, and total. And here was some different options for ruling the system. And the most interesting part was the super curtain part. This curtain, which in the middle of the main curtain and the scene, is called super curtain, or shortly super. And here was the main interface for communicating with the audience. So when some novellas came to a finish, the super curtain came down, and everything voting was started. So this part displays information related to voting, some percentage, names. It announces opening and closing votes, and the most important, it was created using dynamic audio, because again, we wanted that system should communicate with the audience using natural language, and everything should be so clear and naturally that we had almost 200 different audio pieces which were combined, collected on the fly, depending on the scenarios. Actually, those dynamic audio was recorded using Google Speech API, and we wanted to have a call from our system, but we have problems with the network connection, so it wasn't possible to guarantee some specific time for receiving the audio. So in the summary, we had like complex graph model where we have all our scenarios voting system, which like backend collects and rules everything, and 3 front-end systems, one like for giving the votes, administration, and a super curtain. And let's start with the graph, because again, data needs to be stored somewhere, and relation databases won't fit in that case, in case of great data, because it's quite hard and inefficient to model some object which has a lot of relations using tables, because you need so-called intermediate tables if you want to model many-to-many, and it's very hard to have like recursive search here. And there was also like some motivation because we had there wasn't like strict schema. We have a different like possibilities of audio, different so-called edge cases. So we choose Neo4j. So all the scenarios, all the plots were modeled as a graph in Neo4j, and this is quite cool technology which is used for example, in fraud detection, or Neo4j quite efficient in building topology of, for example, services, metrics, etc. And it gives like it's a major platform which gives out of the box a lot of possibility to working with the scenarios. So the server part was a question, okay, Python versus Java, because we have only 2.5 weeks to implement that. Java was chosen because, okay, it's a faster than Python, there is no like global implementation log. We choose Spring Boot because it also has a perfect integration with Neo4j. So again, it was very easy to put everything together. And it's a hard, using major frameworks and technology, it's harder to break. And the overall architecture, yeah, we have a storage for our graph. We have a Spring Boot application which has different REST APIs. One is for administration, one is for all the audience voting, and one for supercutting. And the main non-trivial part of the task was that actually we have two control centers. One is a Java application with a Neo4j which collects votes, which shifted this state for the scenarios, which gave the supervisor, supercurtain, the information about the next states. And another part was that the second control center was the actual EMA, supercurtain part, because this part were communication with the audience. This part started the voting and ended this one. And again, dynamic audio, direction of each audio is quite different, and it was very important to have a synchronization, because if you said that the voting is open and you have some lag, actually voting is not open, it looks quite quite fishy, because in when we started to have those kind of performance in our theater, the first, I don't know, let's say 2-3 performances was like taken with a sort of question, like, it's not natural one. We know you are theater, it's your profession to make some sort of illusions and so on and so on. But after time, after a bit of different performances where everything was different, after it was possible to see a specific name under a specific word, the attitudes were changed. And we have quite interesting psychological things, like people love to play, and for example, half of audience hold their votes till the end, and they try to move some scenarios toward a different option. So yeah, those kind of two control centers: server, which is like source of truth, and a super, which is source of communication and switching everything. So supercurtain ML part was again implemented in Vue.js. And here was 110 pieces of audio for one language version and the same amount for another one, so more than 200. Audio playback and the command calls to the main server were like chained on top of each other because we have different audio. So, for example, this part started to announce what type of voting is starting, announces that voting is open, set the command to change the state, and so on and so on. And it was actually a universal solution to change everything depending on the audio, because audio has a different length. And when we changed our audio files from one language to another, everything became to work out of the box. And this is like, as I said, the show, issues with the mobile client was quite significant because a huge combinatorial combination of different models, operation systems, browser versions. And when you start to play with the Babel, where you try to transpile something, and yeah, at the end of the day, some part of phones that didn't work became to work, but some part of the phones which worked perfectly became to have an issues. And with every step, with every changes in some transpilers, our bundle file was like growing like I don't know, like depth of some African country. And it was written in vanilla.js. It takes, okay, not 3 hours, but 6 hours. But it solved all the problems. Everything was solved. Started to work out of the box on almost all models of mobile phones. And it was like a quite good example for me as well, that you don't need, for example, for a large amount of projects, you don't need to bind all these fancy JavaScript frameworks, React, Vue. If you have if you need to implement some simple type of logic, and this was like a good example. And we have a first test in our company where everybody's with their phones, even modes, and it was also tested like, let's say 7 days before the premiere. In the day of premiere, we had a president, so final release was 146 megabytes of file. In Java it was more like 5,000 lines of code, and a lot of like quite funny stories. And yes, he was our president, which attended the premiere. But the final bug, which I found, was, let's say, 10 minutes before the start. It means that I have no possibility to test, and it was, for me, it was like I'm sitting in backstage with the one headphone, checking all the possible options which could be chosen, just to test, to understand if something will go wrong, that I can set, for example, sound engineer that let's make something that it looks like it should be. So another kind of things which, for example, again, when you start to use modern JavaScript framework in your production dynamical system, is another case. I don't know, do you remember the last year killer symbol for iPhone, which was some Indian and so on? So you will send this, I don't know, using SMS or using some messenger, and if you open it, your phone became like, it's like a hand. And we had a first screen, please enter your name. And someone just entered such kind of symbol. Everything is okay, it was stored in a DB, everything worked fine. But when the audience started to vote, when vote came, then the name of the registered guy was shown here. So it means that when those guys gave a vote, then this symbol became to be visible, actually not, into the main screen. And it looked like that everything is working fine, but sometimes at random intervals, everything stopped. And we used the Vue animation templates, which were okay, like JavaScript framework. We created a beautiful set of animation, everything worked in production ready, but actually it was for us quite like magic, because the intervals, the problems were arose in random intervals. So we like had some different deploys on the fly, And there was a lot of funny stories related to that. Actually, I wanted to turn on the system that to give a possibility for a voting for you, but again, I just came from Tallinn and didn't have a time just to test our server, and there was some problem with the sound assets. But I can show the real footage from one performance. Sorry for the quality, because again it's saturated, it's too dark, but this is how it looked like. So here is so this kind of MIs announce vote is open, and you can see that how the different parts depending on votes are shown with the names and so on. Again, it was quite interesting that people, after they came to understand that this is actually collection of the votes, they became to play with the system. They became to hold some amount of votes, because quite often it was like almost 50-50. And we saw that on less seconds, 1 or 2 or 3 seconds, someone just made everything. Yeah, it's announced. And depending on that, so if a majority was here, so it was announced about here. So it was the idea about that in count. So it was always like you heard like a natural way of communication. We actually have in a Neo4j community blog post about this kind of project, and we have quite good reviews, quite good feedback from the media. For example, here is some Estonian articles, in Russian, some technical one, and we had almost 5 minutes of ovations in a Java festival in Tartu. And the main, again, it was quite interesting that the final performance could be, it was like unfinished performance ever, because it could last from 1.5 hours up to 4 hours. And some of the scenes didn't, had no chance to be presented. So some of those scenes even did not present for the audience. And recently we published the album, musical one, because all the music, all the musical composition which were built among this performance was played in live in a scene. So there is like quite common topics, but again it was quite an amazing work from the musical part, from the theatrical part, and I'm just implementing some technology required. So the host also said we had 2 t-shirts of DevOps unicorns, and I also have 2 vinyls with the album from this performance, written and published as a separate album. But I thought that, okay, I made this play using the vote, so everybody gave a vote, and we found some guys who received it. But right now, I don't know. So
we normally ask questions, and the person who asks more the questions or the better questions you choose, and you just give.
Yeah, you actually
Or
can ask me a question.
we can ask Google a random number. Google will tell random number.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can ask some questions. I don't know, like this project or maybe some topics related with the technologies that we are associated. I will be happy to give an answer. Yeah.
A few questions, but let's start with the first one. How do you check against duplicate votes during the voting stage?
No, no. You everybody received. So the first page was like enter your name, and there was like two buttons, по-русски and Estonian. Let's say. So it was first. We know amount of people speaking different languages, and we know the names. In that stage, everybody received a unique identifier, which gave the possibility to give a vote only once. So after this vote was given, in specific state of voting, the duplicate vote weren't allowed. And yeah.
So calls it unique identifier was kept in state. I mean, so it was like session or Mac.
Cookie, yeah, it was cookie.
But it means I can create as many sessions from the very beginning as I want.
Yeah, yeah,
different browsers, private tabs.
Yeah.
I don't think that most of the admins are aware of such ways to work on this.
We had even situation when someone who were in a performance, for example, last weekend, knew that, for example, this weekend we had another play. Opened from home. Yeah,
not
from home.
Even being in Seattle.
Yeah, work from home. But again, this was like there were like a limited amount of people who I don't know, had the intention or did that. But one quite important thing, why we, for example, collected the which language they were speaking, because we had all the statistics from the logs, who gave for which theme which type of vote. And we saw a lot of conflict between, for example, Estonian and Russian-speaking people, as, for example, you have here in Latvia. And again, a lot of things we knew before, but some of those kind of things were quite interesting. For example, multicultural part, when freedom is most important part for the people, that like everything is permitted. So Russian-speaking audience votes no in the most part. So, for example, if the Estonians, they have like more liberal views and so on and so on. So there was like quite funny things in that case. Yeah.
What was the final deciding factor for going with Java instead of Python, like you mentioned in the very beginning? One of the arguments that you mentioned is that it was faster to develop in Java, but even from experience, if you need to have a product ready by the end of the week, then you always choose Python.
Yeah,
because,
it was not like about the faster development, but again, you know, if we talk about some implementing some part of the crude API or some part of state flows with other storages, then actually modern ideas like idea, you can wrote also less boilerplate code, for example, Lombok, etc., etc. So there is some differences, but not so much. Actually, Python was chosen for prototyping, but Python has significant flows that it has global interpretation lock. So it means that using some blocking code, some thread, it means that this execution flow is blocked until response is back. So Java on the same server working combined with Neo4j gave a quite well, we had a performance that satisfied everyone. So we had a quite small server where we run everything, and it had the possibility to cope with some hundreds of votes changes in a second. Actually, we don't know. It's quite hard to make the performance test. Why? Because if you have 600 people with a mobile phone giving the votes, then you have a problem with the base station because everybody, every phone tries to connect here. And in one performance, we had some large also in a place near our center. We have a quite large organized event where also there was like 2,000, 3,000 people. So nobody can use mobile phone and SRE because we had problems with our seaters, so it was like a problem with the sending and not to lose a packet in the base station. Okay, thank you. And
Thanks.
there is actually, if you have know the new player, there is a release in Spotify as well. And I also wanted to, I don't know, so again, the one thing is left.
Google.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.